We believe that in any context, it's inappropriate to use the Y word.
For me, it's not the word, it's the term and the way it's used.
It's not a badge of honour, it's a badge of racism and racist chanting and racist abuse.
People that are trying to ban the use of the Y word are really looking to be outraged by anything.
I think people thought, oh, is this a type of racism that's that important? And yes, it is.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to this special Tackling Racism programme looking at the issue of anti-Semitism in football. We're going to be investigating the use of the Y word and anti-Semitic chanting in football stadiums and elsewhere, and plenty of other issues. Now, we saw his brother a moment ago. Joining me in the studio, the writer and filmmaker Ivor Badil, Karen Pollock of the Holocaust Educational Trust, the journalist Jacob Steinberg, and the Chelsea Chief Executive Guy Lawrence. And we're going to be joining Chelsea on the March of the Living at the Auschwitz concentration camp.
Father buried his sister with his own hand when he was 13 years old, 2 months after his father, 4 months after his mother.
Plus, we'll reveal some worrying figures about the rise of religious discrimination at grassroots level.
I was scared to kind of go there in their home after some of the comments that we got.
OK, let's start this evening by speaking to our panel. I should say at the outset, we did invite the likes of Tottenham, Arsenal and West Ham to put representatives on our panel this evening, but they did decline. First of all, I wanted to start, and perhaps this is a helpful way to start the programme, is to define what anti-Semitism is for anyone who's unsure, who is watching. Karen, great to have you with us. If you could just lay the foundations for us first, if that...
Sure. So anti-Semitism is a hatred towards Jews. It's a term used that actually you could say it's anti-Jewish racism. And the way it manifests itself, it can be through stereotypes and derogatory terms about Jews. But there's this strange combination of scapegoating Jews, but also saying they're all powerful and all, the conspiracy theory that they're somehow in control. I work for the Holocaust Educational Trust, so what's widely known as the most extreme version of where anti-Semitism can lead is the Holocaust. But the way that anti-Semitism manifests itself today, the term might sound academic, but actually it's like it's not the same as, but it is a form of discrimination and should be regarded as such. And Jacob, in your view, is it treated as seriously as other forms of discrimination within football?
Within football, I think that for a long time, I think that there's been a lot of focus on certain elements that have perhaps we've talked about the monkey chanting at black players in the past, and the fact that perhaps black managers aren't, and black and Asian managers aren't represented enough in the upper levels of English football. But I think sometimes we can turn a bit of a blind eye to what happens in the stands at English football in terms of the anti-Semitism. We've had quite a lot of incidents this year where we've seen it, for example, at Southampton v Tottenham in March, where there was a Southampton fan who stood up and shouted something about Spurs fans going on their way to Auschwitz, and obviously a clear reference to the Holocaust there, and nothing really seems to get reported or done too much about these kind of things, and it seems to be something that people see as a form of banter at times, and they don't quite understand why it's so offensive for Jewish people and anyone to hear that kind of language used.
Well, hopefully by having this programme we're taking a few steps forward in that. Guy, in terms of what you're doing at Chelsea, we're going to look in depth at what the club is doing a little bit later on. But how big a priority is this for you at Stamford Bridge?
I'd say it's right in the DNA of the club. It came from an initiative from our owner back in November of 2017, when he had seen the rise of anti-Semitism across Europe and felt that we as a club should be doing something about it, and we were in a position to, given our fan base and our ability to talk about an issue and be heard. And it's now right the way through the club. All of our staff are trained on this, all of our stewards are trained. We create a lot of educational material. We've taken 145 players and staff to Auschwitz last year, 36 this year, so it's right at the core of the club.
And Ivor, you're a Chelsea fan. How does it make you feel when you hear gas chamber noises, anti-Semitic chants amongst the crowd? And what experiences have you had?
Well, I've had quite a lot of experiences. I mean, the only time I stopped going to Chelsea was when I used to stand in the shed end as a sort of teenager, and all these Nazi skinheads around me going Sieg Heil. I mean, I thought, that's not the right place for a Jewish boy. So I stopped going for a while. But do you know what? Obviously, it makes me feel scared. It makes me feel sick. I hate it. It makes me feel angry. But it's got nothing to do with me being a Chelsea fan. All the work I've done, and I think all the work that everyone's done, is because I'm Jewish. You know, it's got nothing to do with club allegiances. I mean, every club has to deal with their own issues. But, you know, the stuff I've done is as a Jew and not as a Chelsea fan. So occasionally people will say, oh, you know, Tottenham in particular would sometimes say, oh, you're only doing it because you're a Chelsea fan to have a go at Tottenham. It's nothing to do with that. I'm doing what I do because I'm Jewish.
We're going to show you a video now taken on a tram in Manchester. Many people will have been familiar with it. I mean, in this instance, these were the West Ham supporters on their way to a match last month. We've bleeped out the most offensive words, but many of you may still be offended by the language used. Let's have a look. Well, this is what West Ham said at the time of the incident. We're disgusted by the contents of the video. We're taking immediate action to try to identify the offenders, whose details we will be handing over to the police, and they will be banned for life from the London Stadium and from travelling with the club. West Ham is unequivocal in its stance. There is no place for this kind of behaviour at our club. We do not want people like this associated with West Ham. They are not welcome at our club. They are not welcome in civilised society. Now, we asked West Ham if they had anything else to add to that statement, which was a few weeks ago, but they didn't. We are going to be speaking to the person who actually posted that video a little bit later on. Jacob, you're a West Ham fan. How did you feel when you saw that incident? Presumably you've seen that before.
I've seen it many times before. I felt disgusted, but not surprised, because I've been to enough West Ham games to know that it's a major issue, whether or not they're playing. Tottenham, it's an issue that maybe you'll see in the grounds. It's an issue that you'll see online, on forums, where people think that perhaps that kind of language is acceptable to use against Tottenham fans and specifically as well against Jewish people. I think that there's a point at which that song can be seen as a form of banter. It's seen as a jokey kind of thing, but there's a form of othering that takes place in talking about circumcision. It's a way of isolating a community. The two words that are tacked onto the end of the song are obviously clearly offensive and discriminatory. I think when a Jewish person probably hears that kind of language, I think that there's a fear that creeps into you, and I think that whenever I've heard something like that at a football match, whenever I've been at a West Ham game or anywhere else and I've heard some kind of form of anti-Semitism, it's almost like you freeze in that moment and you feel like you would like to turn around and say, don't say that, but you're also worried about the blowback that you might get. I remember being at a Ipswich v West Ham game in 2004 and suddenly hearing, just before kick-off, Spurs are on their way to Auschwitz, and this was supposed to be a huge game it was a playoff semi-final, and suddenly you're there as a 17 or 18-year-old kid at the time, and you're just frozen in that moment, and you're thinking, what am I doing here? Why am I listening to this anti-Semitism? And I'm sure that the person who posted that video on the tram in Manchester felt much the same way, not exactly knowing how to do it. These days we can film these things on the phones, but in terms of actually combating the people who do that, it's very, very difficult.
Ivor, you wanted to come in?
I just want to say, yeah, I think it's very interesting, and it's part of the whole confusion with the issue that I would say, even with the Auschwitz chant, but certainly with that, that one there, the West Ham one, I would argue that a lot of the people, and that's why programmes like this are so good, don't really understand that they're being anti-Semitic. I think they think they're being anti-Tottenham, and they think, therefore, that's OK. And to me, I know we're going to come on to talk about the Y word, but I think that's how confused it's got. That people can make a chant about Spurs are on their way to Auschwitz, Hitler's going to gas them again, and think they're just having a go at Spurs fans without realising. And that, for me, sums up the whole confusion and why, as I know we're going to come on to talk about that later, but, as I said, obviously as Jews, you understand it's anti-Semitic, but I think a lot of people don't realise that.
There was a prominent West Ham account that just before a West Ham v Tottenham game in October who posted there was a post of a picture of Orthodox Jews, and it was referenced as Tottenham fans. And when I took it up with this person, I said, no, it's jokey and everything, but it's a way of isolating another kind of community, and you're also in the way of simply targeting Tottenham fans and saying that Tottenham fans are Jewish. You then, because as a West Ham fan, you're supposed to hate Tottenham, it's the big rivalry, and I don't have any kind of problem with the rivalry that exists within football. But when you turn it into Tottenham fans are Jewish, the logical follow-on is eventually you get to the point where actually it's all right to say things about Jews, it's all right to hate Jews because Jews are Tottenham fans are Jews, we hate Tottenham, so let's hate the Jews as well. And it leads to ultimately to some even worse kind of chanting. And when you challenge these people, you can turn around and you could end up getting punched in the face at a ground or something like that, or outside the ground or on a tram.
I think a lot of sort of hate comes from ignorance. So one of the key things is it has to be about educating people and raising awareness. And I know we'll come on to it later, but that's one of the things we've been doing with Chelsea. It's a way of making sure people are invested in understanding what it is they're looking for and what they're seeing and how they can possibly intervene. The other thing is that something about anti-Semitism that is different perhaps from other forms of discrimination. We often say, if you imagine a glass of water and you put a drop of ink into it and it spreads and it mutates, it has this way of seeping into dialogue and into whether it's chants or whatever else in a way that it somehow eventually becomes acceptable or permissible, perhaps less blatant. I think the chanting there was clearly blatant, but there are other times when it isn't. And so the more people are aware and more understanding of what it is that they can see and recognising it, they can call it out. I mean, I would add one thing, which is about that footage. I know you said we'll hear from the family that posted it, but they are a family of a Holocaust survivor who we work very closely with. And when I saw that on social media, it was even more shocking to think that a survivor and his family are aware of seeing something like this today in 2019, something they never imagined they would see in Britain, let alone that their family would experience themselves. It's hurtful, and I think sometimes we've got to remember whether we're talking about any discrimination, racism, anti-Semitism, this is about human beings, and it hurts.
Guy, how collaborative is the process that Chelsea are involved with? Is this something that you're just leading the charge with, or are you welcoming in other clubs and are you seeing that collaborative element very clear or not?
Well, so everything we're producing is available to all the clubs, and obviously they can take our branding off and put their own branding on. So we created the guide for stewards, which is a very key, important role in a football stadium because they're looking after a group of fans. So we distributed that to all of the clubs, not just in the Premier League. And they have access to all of our materials. We also have a meeting every time we have a home fixture with the other club to discuss a number of issues, and this is high on the agenda. So we're not trying to claim the high ground in one respect here, we're just trying to make sure we do our bit. But everything we produce is available to all the other clubs.
And how keen are you that the fans that Ivor was talking about back in the day, who are still carrying out some anti-Semitic behaviour themselves on the Chelsea terraces are dealt with?
Well, it's very clear in our terms and conditions. We don't accept that kind of behaviour, and if we catch you, you're banned, and it's very simple. And now we need to make sure we have the right proof, because you do need to give people the chance to respond when there are allegations against them. Therefore, we go through a process. The process takes a number of weeks. But all our fans are very clear about what is acceptable and what isn't. And if they're caught saying words or phrases or chants or songs or anything, quite frankly, that's unacceptable, they're banned.
Yeah. Karen, I think it's at this point pertinent to look back into history and learn the lessons from the past. Obviously, with the work with the Holocaust Educational Trust, I mean, you spoke before about behaviour being seen, being normalised. We know what it can lead to, I suppose.
Exactly.
As we're seeing on the screen.
Right, sorry. So, yeah, look, when we teach about the Holocaust, we want people to understand what happened in the past. And you can see here footage of communities arriving. I think this is at Auschwitz. You'll have to confirm that for me. But yeah, it is. And you can see women and children. in the all familiar sort of blue and white pyjama that people are familiar with, and you can see them holding out their arms with the tattoo that a lot of inmates were imprinted with. This strange, warped but highly organised operation of the Nazis, that counting whoever came in and whoever was murdered. So really clear documentation. The story of the Holocaust is one, it's a dark story. There aren't many positive things that come out of it. What we learn about is how prejudice led to segregation and deportation, to concentration and death camps, where sadly people were sent directly to gas chambers and murdered. Guy mentioned before about visits to Auschwitz that we organised for the fans and supporters of Chelsea, where they saw for themselves where hatred can ultimately lead. And I should say, actually, on this, our work is mainly in schools and colleges and universities across the country, but it's about society and our communities. So working with football clubs, and I have to say Chelsea's been a true model in this, because this isn't ticking a box. This isn't some short-term initiative. It has longevity, and it means that people are properly invested in understanding, by stewards understanding and learning about the Holocaust. They're going to intervene and feel more confident and equipped to say when something is wrong. And similarly, the educational program that the club are taking on with people who are guilty of, saying and doing things that are more than inappropriate.
OK. Guys, thank you very much for now. We are going to have a break now, but we are going to be hearing very shortly from the likes of David Luiz as we follow Chelsea to Boston to raise money and awareness, importantly, about anti-Semitism. Welcome back to Tackling Racism and our focus on anti-Semitism. Now, these are just a few of the headlines that we've seen in the past few years regarding anti-Semitic chants from fans around the country, both inside and outside stadiums. Now we have a special report looking at how Chelsea are taking the lead in trying to tackle this problem. We've been with them on the March of the Living at Auschwitz, and Roger Clark was in Boston with the club last week.
Let's go!
Stadium, Massachusetts. Chelsea versus New England Revolution. Two clubs coming together to blow the final whistle on hate.
It's the centrepiece of Chelsea's Say No to Anti-Semitism campaign. All proceeds going to charities promoting tolerance and equality. Chelsea owner Roman Abramovich and New England Revolution owner Robert Kraft have each donated $1 million. This isn't just about words, it's about action.
It goes back to the fall of 2017, when the board of directors of Chelsea was having an informal discussion with Mr. Abramovich about a variety of subjects. And he pointed out the rash of anti-Semitic incidents that had been happening in the world around that time. And he suggested that maybe we should have a more comprehensive program added to all the anti-discrimination things that we already do, a comprehensive program to try to tackle anti-Semitism.
Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew.
Key to Chelsea's mission, education, starting with the first team. While in Boston, a visit to the Holocaust Memorial. As the most prominent faces of a club with a global reach and over 70 million followers on social media, they're at the forefront of the campaign, learning for themselves and passing it on to the next generation.
Every single day, our heart and our brain has to be open to learn and help.
We have the opportunity to do this kind of thing. We, as a player, you in your job, and I think everybody understands life is not about your color skin, it's not about where you came from, it's not about your nationality. It's all about love, and they understand life. We can teach the kids now to grow up in a different way. I think it's difficult to change old generations with war, with many stuff they had in the past, and they had some pain in the heart.
We're marching on.
A celebration of life in a place synonymous with death. The March of the Living, a 3-kilometre walk from Auschwitz to Birkenau, 10,000 people drawn from across the globe coming together on Holocaust Memorial Day to remember those who died at the hands of the Nazis here, and also the Holocaust survivors, a triumph of human spirit. Among them, a delegation from Chelsea, academy players, coaches, directors, alongside representatives from New England Revolution. It's already an annual pilgrimage for former manager Avram Grant, for whom it has a personal significance.
I'm a second generation of survivor of Holocaust. My father is survivor of Holocaust. It's 10 years since he passed away. My father, in the World War II, buried his sister with his own hand when he was 13 years old, 2 months after his father, 4 months after his mother. Even with all of that, he was the most optimistic guy I ever met. It's very important, Chelsea doing what they are doing in this project at Roman Abramovich. It's very important that the world will go to the right direction and not to the wrong direction. We are talking about to use this platform to speak against hate, against racism, against everything that is evil, and put the people in the right direction.
For the Chelsea youngsters, it's an education. Meeting Holocaust survivors, observing for themselves the horrific conditions in which prisoners lived and died. Between 1942 and 1945, 1.3 million people, the vast majority Jewish, were taken to the Auschwitz concentration camps. 1.1 million perished, most in the gas chambers, others from starvation, illness, or shot. The site where these horrors occurred, now preserved as a reminder and lesson for future generations.
It's been quite a touching and incredible experience, but one which was also quite interesting. And I think something I can take back to the club is how I think together as a unity we're much more powerful than individual. And I think together we can help to stop anti-Semitism.
I'll be taking away a lot, to be honest. My one would be don't take life for granted, because coming here today, like studying it in school, the wars and stuff, when you actually come here, you can never actually how bad it was. And every room you go into, you think, wow, in a bad way, like it's horrible and it's really moving.
We marched in front of him, and those who did not come up to that standard, being able to use for slave labor, were sent to a gas chamber.
Back at Chelsea's training ground, the education comes to them. Susan Pollock lived through the horrors of Auschwitz and Belsen, a survivor with a warning that we must guard against history repeating itself.
This is important actually to recognize there are various stages building up that has the potential to erupt. And we must stop it at the early stage. We learn mostly from what we hear and whom we respect. And the football club message is vital. And if they speak up and if they show a way, people will believe it. And hopefully, gradually, this hate will disappear.
To hear a story like that, I mean, that's probably once in a lifetime that I'll get to hear it in the girls outside, and to see how it affected someone, but almost how positive she is it's unbelievable. And you can probably see my voice is a little bit wobbly, but it's truly inspirational. Anyone that can hear that, I think you need to hear it, because probably the state the world's in at the minute and where we are in our country personally, I think that message can go so far.
The campaign isn't just for the players, fans too. As recently as last December, Chelsea apologised after supporters were heard singing an anti-Semitic song at a Europa League game in Slovakia. The club's approach for fans' offences has been, where possible, educational, including trips to Auschwitz.
When you punish someone in certain situations, it only makes the situation worse. It doesn't make them not a racist, it makes them more a racist. And we came to the view that at a certain level of incident, it would be better off to try to educate these people so they would no longer be an anti-Semite or a racist, and bring them back to Chelsea as a proper citizen.
It's a message that's going transatlantic. In April, Bruce Buck led a Chelsea delegation to a final whistle on hate seminar at New York University. where the Say No to Anti-Semitism campaign initiative is held up as a leading example of corporate responsibility.
What's been interesting to see and to experience is to introduce a conversation and other examples of corporate social responsibility in sports, and then to bring in this example from Chelsea. And for students, you can see it on their faces, in the room. It's not light bulbs going off, it's something else sort of coming over them going, oh my goodness, I never thought about that concept in that way. I never thought about anybody, any organization taking something to that level.
And where Chelsea have led, New England Revolution have followed. They've made it their mission to replicate Chelsea's work over here in the United States and to get others to climb on board too.
It's a very important initiative to our ownership group and certainly to our club now. It's something we want to continue. So we're learning a lot right now from Chelsea in terms of what they've already done. And so they've really helped us get on board with the initiative. And there's a number of organizations both in the UK and the States that we're already pledging some support to. And I think part of that funding, we hope, is ways that they can continue the fight, but also to think about, well, how can we include, whether it's the Revolution, whether it's Chelsea or other sports clubs in other parts of the world in this fight that we want to take together.
We knew we wanted to stick at it. We knew we wanted to do it for a long period of time, but we also recognize that it's a difficult issue and it's not going to disappear with a couple of education events, that we all have to work hard at it to end anti-Semitism, to end racism, to end all kinds of discrimination.
A bold project with the ultimate ambition to blow the final whistle on hate.
Yeah, fascinating piece on the work that Chelsea are doing. And Guy, I suppose when you watch that, the main message is that we need to educate rather than just simply push people away.
Yeah, the thing is that you could take the view that if you find people behaving in this way, you just ban them and then somehow your responsibility is ended. But actually, that's not true. So when fans are caught offending in this way, we give them the chance to come to an education session where they're actually taught about what happened in its full horror, to make sure that they understand the consequences of what they've done. And we believe that's a good way forward in terms of tackling this problem.
Ivor, that's your club doing that. Does that impress you?
Yeah, I'm really impressed. And it has been said already, they're not just paying lip service to it. I remember they launched the campaign, it was on my birthday, January the 31st, at home to Bournemouth. We lost 3-0, I think. It was awful. But that's when, last year, 2018, right? But that's when they launched the campaign. And it could have just launched it and then it just dribbles on for a bit and forgotten it. But no, I made a film, through Chelsea before Kick It Out. That my understanding was, it came right from the highest echelon saying, no, it's time, we want to keep this going, we need another film, we need more efforts. As Bruce alluded to, change doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time to change people, so you can't just pay lip service to it. And I know I'm a Chelsea fan, but that's got nothing to do with it. As a Jew, I really applaud Chelsea for what they're doing.
And as somebody who isn't a Chelsea fan specifically, I have to say, they should feel proud of the efforts they are making. And I think there's something else. The power of seeing David Luiz, talking in that way about why this is important. Footballers communicate with our nation in a way I wish my organisation could. They're saying this matters and we've got to stand up and do something about it. It sets the strongest example possible. And the other thing is that, it's a learning curve. Every step that we're taking, and I do feel that we've had really meaningful engagement with the club. Everything we're doing, we're learning from it, and we'll keep on coming up with new initiatives. Susan spoke to the women's team, and it had that huge impact. But I remember when Harry Spyro went to meet with the first team, when we were in Boston, Eden Hazard said to me he remembered Harry, he asked how old he was, he reminded me how positive he was. These people, they leave an indelible mark on the audiences they reach, and as a result, the footballers become the next generation of witnesses and have a power to spread a message that really is phenomenal and something we should applaud, and we just want more of it.
The problem you've got as well is that if you just ban people straight away out of and say you can't come to football anymore, you're not doing anything to correct the problem. They can just go home and they're going to spread the same kind of message to the rest, to their friends, to their children and everything. if a child is hearing that kind of language, they're going to pick it up and they're just going to bring it into, and it's going to be a problem with the next generation. If you can find a way, as we've seen there with David Luiz talking to young kids, talking about his own experiences of going to Auschwitz and seeing the horrors that took place there, it can reach people in a way that certainly other industries can't. But it also it helps with educating people, make sure that they understand why it's wrong. I think anybody who actually understood what it meant to hiss, to mimic the gas chambers, if they ever actually understood what happened when people were gassed, I don't think they would do that.
And just one final point to add. I think the point here is, you know, it's not banter, it's bigotry. And you've got to be able to explain the impact of some of these things that people are saying. When I've sat in on a session where there was somebody guilty of anti-Semitism in the stadium, he learnt. He watched the film that you've done, Ivor. He was part of conversations about understanding anti-Semitism, but he wanted, you know, the club, like for anyone, clubs are important to fans. They care about the team they support. And if they're being told by their own club, this is why what you're doing is wrong, this is why it matters and you need to stop it, this is why you need to encourage the people you're sitting around to stop it, well, that's a ripple effect, and it could really, I think it should have a strong impact.
OK, thank you very much. For now, on the way, we're going to be focusing on the Y word and that debate.
The things that you even say in the gas chamber chants and stuff like that, the things that we've gone through and we've had to put up with, yeah, how we have turned it around and turned it into something positive, you can't take that from us. No way, no way.
Welcome back to our Tackling Racism programme, looking at anti-Semitism in football. We're now going to look closely at one of the more contentious issues in the debate, the use of the Y word by Tottenham fans as arguably a badge of honour. Generally, we'll try to refer to it as the Y word, but of course it is used in full by supporters. This came from Tottenham's last home game against Everton 8 days ago. Well, as we mentioned a little bit earlier on, we did invite Tottenham to contribute to the programme. They have provided us with this statement. They say it is important that there is a focus and a clampdown on the real evil that is anti-Semitism, and that our fans' use of the Y word is never cited as an excuse for such unacceptable behaviour. There is no excuse. Our fans, both Jewish and Gentile, have never used the Y word in an offensive manner. They use it as a form of self-identification, having originally adopted it to defect anti-Semitic abuse. We recognise that this is a complex issue and that the appropriateness of its use should always be assessed. We undertook a survey of fans' use of the term in October 2013 and shall be conducting a further fan consultation prior to the start of next season. OK. Ivor, let's start with you. I could see you shaking your head as I was reading out that statement. You made a film a few years ago now about the Y word with Kick It Out. Just in general terms, I mean, I'm guessing your view hasn't changed. What's your view of Tottenham fans using the Y word?
Well, there's so many things to say. But first and foremost, it's important to realise the vast majority of Tottenham fans are not Jewish. I think somebody said earlier something like maybe 3.5%. Yeah. That's nothing out of a crowd of 40, 50,000 or 60,000 as it is now. That's barely 500, 600 people. So, you know, basically what they're doing is appropriating an offensive word for Jews. Non-Jews are appropriating that word. And what's very interesting about their statement is they're saying that they appropriated it in order to deflect the abuse. Now, that's very similar to the argument that black people have used with the N-word, which in itself is divisive within the black community. But by and large, whatever you think of that tactic has possibly worked because most people realise that's a highly offensive word and don't use it. If Tottenham fans' aim, and this is just one of the arguments, but if their aim is to deflect the anti-Semitism, it clearly hasn't worked because all it does is make other fans chant it back at Tottenham fans with venom, and it leads to all those other chants. So as a tactic, it hasn't worked. That's one thing to say. The other thing is it's ridiculously confusing when you've got non-Jews saying that word because the sort of metaphor, if you like, that I use is if you're a Jewish Tottenham fan walking down the street and someone calls you a Y word, essentially what you have to say to them is, are you calling me that because I'm a Tottenham fan or because I'm a Jew? Because I need to know first before I'm offended. That's a ridiculous confusion. That's absurd. So, and I don't think, you know, I know Tottenham fans aren't being anti-Semitic or not knowingly anti-Semitic by saying it, but because of that confusion that it causes and because of the fact that it hasn't worked, their aim of the whole point, you know, to deflect anti-Semitism hasn't worked. And the whole, sorry, I'm ranting a bit, but the badge of honour thing I find ridiculous. Because if something's a badge of honour, then you would hold it up and you'd sell it in the club shop. And as far as I know, in the official club shop at Tottenham, they won't sell shirts with the Y word on. But it's a badge of honour. If it's a badge of honour, why wouldn't you? So they know there's something wrong with it.
Let's get an alternative view, because it's all about debating this. Sociology Professor Frank Furedi is a season ticket holder. He's also Jewish, and he believes the Y word is a positive thing.
When people yell, "Yid Army," that's done with enthusiasm, it's done with respect. There's a kind of joyous atmosphere about it. And it seems to me that, you know, people who are critical of that simply don't understand the meaning of this word for those individuals. And I just think that people that are trying to ban the use of the Y word are really looking to be outraged by anything. And it's a kind of very cheap form of virtue signaling that's got nothing to do with football.
OK, let's get the view of another Tottenham fan now, the YouTuber Expressions Oozing.
With us, there's certain words that people of colour may say to each other, do you know what I'm saying? And if other people was to use it, it may seem rude or offensive or something like that. But for me, it's not the word, it's the term and the way it's used. Back in the day, the things that you even say in the gas chamber chants and stuff like that, the things that we've gone through and we've had to put up with, yeah, how we have turned it around and turned it into something positive, you can't take that from us. No way, no way.
OK, let's deal with some of the points that have been made there. First of all, it was mentioned about Tottenham fans' virtue signalling. Jacob, what's your view on that?
I think it's a difficult debate. I think that there's an element at times of people arguing in bad faith where they criticise Tottenham fans' use of the Y word. I'm not talking about either here. I'm talking about where people who maybe have said something anti-Semitic, a fan of another club, and you might call them out on it, they might then come back and say, well, what about Spurs fans using the Y word? I think in that moment there, I think they're simply using that to deflect from their own wrongdoing. At the same time, I think that when a minority group calls out something that they find offensive, I always think it's worth listening to it rather than ignoring it. I don't know necessarily what Tottenham fans would lose from not chanting that song anymore, from not referring to themselves as the Yid Army. I think that ultimately if prominent Jewish groups and Jews who aren't Tottenham fans find it so offensive, at some point I think you have to listen to it. And I think Ivor makes a lot of pertinent points about the fact that it makes themselves a target. Whether that's good or not, what that says about the people who then target them, that's another point.
It's just worth saying as well, I mean, the Y word is historically a derogatory term against Jews. The idea of reclaiming the word it's so contradictory. It's a word that you want to consign to history, not that you somehow want to wear as a badge on your, you know, lapel or whatever. I think that I understand it's contentious and I understand it can be confusing, but it comes back to this point about if offence is caused, it's caused, the hurt is there. And I think that I understand the point also about intent. You always should understand why people use it. But I think if there are other ways to express your support for a team, perhaps that's the better way to do it. And I do wonder whether, you know, Tottenham have moved to a new stadium. Maybe this is the new moment to start reflecting on and working out what could be done to address what I think should really be, you know, consigned to history.
And they have said that they are going to continue to consult with fans. The last time they did it was 2013, which was 6 years ago. Guy, in terms of Chelsea's stance, the impact of Tottenham fans using the Y word, how do those two match up? Does it have an impact on what you're trying to do? Does it make it more difficult?
It creates confusion. At the end of the day, we take guidance from the World Jewish Council and the Board of Deputies, and they've said it's offensive, and therefore, as far as we're concerned, it's offensive, and that's the policy that we reflect in the terms and conditions at Stamford Bridge, and we will continue to do so, and Tottenham have taken a different view.
OK. Panel, we have to just hit a break, unfortunately, Ivor, but we will be back very, very shortly. We have much more to come, including speaking to journalist Darren Richman, whose mother recorded that footage on the tram in Manchester that we saw a little bit earlier on. OK, welcome back. Joining us now from his home in North London is journalist Darren Richman, whose mother took the video that we saw earlier on of West Ham supporters on the tram. Darren, thanks very much for speaking to us. Just give us the background to that incident, how and why it was captured.
So basically, ordinarily I would have gone to the game with my father, but I couldn't go that day, so my mum went with him, and they were on the tram from Piccadilly Station to Old Trafford, and my mum was sort of vaguely amused by the fact that West Ham fans completely dominated the tram. There were hardly any United fans, home fans, on the tram at that moment, and so she took her camera out, her phone out, just to film it, and thought it was quite entertaining. And then, as luck would have it, or not, at the moment she took her phone out to start filming, they started singing the chant that you heard earlier. And obviously that was fairly shocking for her and my father, both Jewish, and my mum especially, her father being an Auschwitz survivor.
I mean, we showed the reaction from West Ham earlier on, and they condemned it pretty swiftly, didn't they, with that statement? But, I mean, overall, how adequate do you feel that the follow-up has been from them?
I think that what they did on the day was very impressive. My mother posted it on Twitter, I posted it on Twitter. It kind of sort of, you know, it was quite far-reaching, and I think there was a sense that a lot of football journalists like Jacob were sharing it, and Karen shared it, and it seemed like something had to be done. West Ham put out that statement that was, as you say, unequivocal and was quite impressive. But the sense that I got in the immediate aftermath was they put out the statement, but nothing else would really be done. It kind of looked good for them and they put out the statement. But to be completely fair to them, I actually had a call today from someone, as it happens, from Kick It Out, who is dealing with West Ham directly. And it looks like what will happen now is that my grandfather will actually go and address the West Ham supporters group and Karen Brady. And I think that would be a worthwhile thing to happen next.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a very interesting development, Darren. I mean, you previously had visited concentration camps with your grandfather. I mean, overall, when he sees incidents like this and this sort of language and these sorts of chants being used, what does he think, considering what he's experienced?
I think it's very shocking for him. I think the important thing to remember is that, you know, these things don't happen in a vacuum. Football is just a reflection of society. When we talk about racism in football or anti-Semitism in football, we're just talking about things that exist in society. And unfortunately, it seems in the last couple of years like people are being emboldened to do these things out in public again. And I think that does actually sort of have horrible echoes for him of his youth, and it's very shocking and it's very sad for him that this seems to be the way we're going again. And, you know, are we doomed to kind of not learn from our past? And hopefully that isn't the case, and hopefully all these initiatives and the things that the Holocaust Educational Trust do, and, you know, the survivors going and speaking to these people can do something to remedy this and make sure we don't go down the kind of horrible route we did in the last century.
Darren, we appreciate your time this evening. Thank you very much indeed. I wanted to throw some of the points to the panel that Darren's raised there. Obviously, it's good signs that West Ham have seen this issue. They're dealing with it in some form, and that is with education, which is what you want.
Absolutely. I think that, in fact, Ziggy, Darren's grandfather, I think has been there before many years ago. Look, that's a great step. I think the thing is, somebody said earlier something about, you know, when they are big issues that everybody knows about, then seeing that a club stamps it out and is really quick, of course that's effective and important. But actually, any murmur, any suggestion of hatred, anti-Semitism, racism, and whatever else, if it isn't picked up and addressed, then it's allowed somehow to be, well, that's okay. It shouldn't wait till it is a big deal or everybody is talking about it. So leading by example is really important, but of course that's positive. I mean, if there's one parting shot from me, it's we've had this brilliant relationship with Chelsea that is ongoing. I'd like to see that happening with all the football clubs. We have worked with Liverpool and Man City and Norwich and Middlesbrough, but I would say the initiative that Chelsea have led is really a model that others could follow.
Guy, a quick word from how Chelsea are approaching this, very briefly. In terms of self-policing, fans doing it for themselves on the terraces, how important is that?
Yeah, well, we talked a lot about the players and we talked about what the club's doing, but the most gratifying thing, I think, has been actually our fan groups. So we have about 15 to 20 main fan groups that are part of a forum, and they've gone through the education themselves. And what's clear is that they've come together as one unit now and have started to self-police on the terraces. So we can actually see and we get feedback from the stands, which is very important from evidence collecting, but it's also just from people turning to the person next to them and saying, cut it out. And that's before it's ever seen on the cameras or it's ever expressed in a loud way. And I think that actually is the ray of hope in all of this, is that if the fan groups get together and combine and have the strength to actually tackle this thing head on, then we can get it out of the stadiums once and for all.
Unfortunately, time has beaten us. Ivor, Jacob, apologies we haven't given you a final word, but we really appreciate you being here. We do hope that you've enjoyed being part of this panel. Huge thanks to our guests, Karen Pollock, Jacob Steinberg, Guy Lawrence, Ivor Badil, Dan Richmond as well, who joined us. Our next programme in the series will examine Asians in football. Thanks very much for joining us.